All right, let's jump into the first section for our chapter on socialization. First, we'll look at theories of self-development. We will look at the psychological perspectives, look at three main very influential psychologists, look at who theorize self-development. We'll examine what their ideas are, and then we'll look at several sociological theories that responded in a way to psychological perspectives on self-development. They're quite different, although some students may think that they're similar or the same, but in fact they're not, so I want to emphasize that. So we'll look at Cooley, a very well-known sociologist who influenced George Herbert Mead, and then we will look at KOHLBERG'S theory of moral development, and then Gilligan's theory of moral development. All right, so the psychological perspective. There are three there's so many people who are really well known in this discipline, but one whom is, I think most of you know of or have heard of, his name is Sigmund Freud, who lived about 100 years ago, approximately 100 to 150 years ago. And he believes that personality is really rooted, how we become, who we are, our personality. It's really rooted in different psychosexual stages of maturation during our early years. And if we all go through this, and according to him, if we are too attached or we're stuck in a particular stage and can't transition in a healthy way to the next stage, then that would impact our personality in a negative way. So either we can't move on to the next stage, or we're stuck. That is not healthy. Or if we move through the psychosexual stages too fast, that's also not good as well. So according to him, everyone. Oops, sorry about that. That's my timer. Haha, not for us though. So going back to the slides. So he said that again, right? There are these psychosexual stages of maturation that we all go through, and we have to go in at a certain, in a healthy way, and then we also have to exit in a healthy way to go to the next stage. But if we don't, then that will negatively impact our personality. One of his famous students, Erik Erikson, was built on Sigmund Freud's theory, but he changed it slightly a bit. Unlike Freud, he doesn't think that personality is almost 100% rooted in your early stages of life. Secondly, Erikson doesn't believe that a self-development evolves around our sexual desires or sexual needs. Oops, sorry about that again. So anyways, I have so many alerts on my computer. Apologize for that. Okay, so going back to Erik Erikson. So again, he is Sigmund Freud's student. He built on Freud's theory, but also deviated from Freud in many ways, as I just pointed out. So he developed 8 stages of development, and again, he doesn't believe that it's all about sexual needs and desire, and in fact, according to him, who we become, our personality, is also shaped by society, the people we interact with, and how we're received or welcomed by society, or rejected by society. A third famous psychologist who studies self-development is Jean Piaget. He is French, and I hope I pronounced his name correctly. So he argues that the self evolves through the negotiation between our internal mind, right, and also the external social world. So in a way, he kind of echoed Erikson's theory about how our personality is not isolated in just our mind or our inner needs, but also is shaped by our interaction with the external world as well. So now let's look at sociological theories of self-development, which is quite different from psychological theories. And as you may have guessed, sociological theories have more emphasis on society, right? How society impacts us. And society includes other individuals as well as other groups, such as family, friends, co-workers, and so on, as well as institutions. They have huge impact on who we become. So one of the most well-known sociologists in the field of self-development is Charles Cooley. And he developed this idea called the looking glass self. He concluded that the human development is socially created, that our sense of self develops from interaction with other people. So he coined this term and its whole process of looking glass self to describe this process. So according to Cooley, this process contains 3 steps. First, we imagine how we look to other people. And then second, we interpret others' reaction. How do they evaluate us? And then thirdly, from that, we develop self-concept. So usually, if people react negatively to us, usually we respond in such a way. If we conform, for example, then we would change. So that way we wouldn't get that negative reactions from other people again. But if we're rebellious, then we would continue to act in such a way, despite the fact that there are negative reactions from other people. So in a way, think of it as as a mirror. Society is kind of like our social mirror, right? That leads to a positive concept when we get a positive reflection, and when we get a negative reflection, we would get a negative self-concept. So we think negatively of ourselves. So what if we misjudge other people's reactions to us? So let's say they actually like the dress that we're wearing, but we thought that they didn't like it. Well, you know what? According to Cooley, the misjudgment on our part, also become part of our self-concept. So keep in mind that this whole process of the looking glass self is an ongoing, lifelong process. It does not stop at all. It's kind of scary, right? So I found this video, which is a very good video to visually illustrate this idea of the looking glass self to you. So go ahead and stop this video so that way you can check out this YouTube video. All right, so let's go on to the next part. So now we're looking at George Herbert Mead, who was heavily influenced by Cooley as well. He agreed with Cooley in many of his theories, but added that play is critical to the development of a self. So in a play, we learn to take on the roles of others and to understand how others feel and think. So before I go into that, there are 2 very interesting concepts that Mead defined and is central to his theory of play and the stages that we go through in order to develop self. So first of all, he defines self as a person's distinct identity that is developed through social interaction. So there is no such thing as a self without society. So the self become the self, by interaction with other people. There's no such thing as a self that is isolated from society. And he also coined this term called generalized other, which is the common behavior expectations of general society. So this is, in a way, when we have already become aware and kind of absorb some of the behavior expectations of the general society. Okay, so now let's go into the stages of development that Mead theorized, and it will also touch upon those two terms that I just defined for you. So Mead concluded that children are first able to take only the role of significant other, like parents or siblings, for example. Excuse me. So as the self develops, children internalize expectation of other people and eventually the entire group. So again, this is where the generalized other is. So he referred to the norms, values, attitudes, and expectations of people in general as a generalized other. So according to me, the development itself goes through stages. In the first stage is imitation, and this is where children initially can only mimic the gesture and words of others. So they'll say like mama, papa, for example, because they keep on hearing these two words over and over again. In the second stage, the children play. So around at the age of 3, children take on the roles of specific people, such as a firefighter, the Lone Ranger, or any of the characters that in a movie that they've been watching and they love so much. I mean, I'm sure you've seen some of those kids where, oh my God, they're so adorable in a way, like they want to watch the same video or same film over and over and over again. They do not get bored at all, and they want to get dressed up like that person, and so on, right? So it's very cute, right? Because they take on these new roles of characters that they really like. And then in the third stage, the game stage, and this is approximately in the first years of school, the children become involved in organized team games and must learn the role of each member of the team. So that way they can, first of all, predict how other people react, and then also plan accordingly how they should react to other people as well. So Mead concluded that not only the self, but also the mind is a social product. We are a product of our society, and we here includes our mind. So we cannot think without symbols, and it is our society that gives us our symbols by giving us our language. The language for us to understand who we are and who other people are. So here I've included an image of that reflect the 3 stages that Mead developed in his theory. And this is, hopefully you can help you understand the 3 concepts much more clearly, as well as some of his key terminology, such as significant other and generalized other. So now we're going to look at several theory of moral development. We'll start out with Lawrence Kohlberg, and he, as a sociologist, he has always wondered, how do people learn to decide what is right and wrong? So his research falls into this field called, studies about moral development. And moral development can be defined as the way in which people learn what society considered to be good and bad. So Kohlberg concluded that humans go through a sequence of stages in the development of morality. So in the pre-conventional stage, this is when the child, may start out with not being able to distinguish between right and wrong, and then slowly the child will, to develop, ways in order to understand that they should follow rules in order to stay out of trouble. So that's the pre-conventional stage. Then in the conventional stage, this is when the child follows the norms and values of society. And lastly, in the post-conventional stage, this is when the child reflects on abstract principles of right and wrong, and using these principles to judge behavior. So Gilligan, Carol Gilligan, was also a sociologist who studied more development, and he built on Kohlberg's research by looking at gender and sex. She was wondering if, boys and girls, do they have different views on morality? So in a way, while she's building on Kohlberg's research on moral development, she was in a way also critiquing Kohlberg for, being somewhat biased in his research for focusing mostly on boys and men. So she is, she believes that because of his bias in terms of his sample, that his, findings are probably also misconstrued as well. So in her study, she aims to remedy this this gap in his research, which is to include, looking at, females as well. So, so she disagreed with Kohlberg's conclusion because they did not match her own experience, and and again, part of it is because he had used only boys in his studies. So in her own study, which includes boys and girls, she found that females tend to evaluate morality in terms of personal relationship, right? And how actions will affect others. On the other hand, males think in terms of abstract principles of right and wrong, or the justice perspective. While the female, which is that there's more emphasis on the care and responsibility, in terms of relationship, as well as how actions will affect other people. So other researchers have tested Gilligan's conclusions and found no gender differences. So based on this subsequent work, Gilligan no longer supports her original position. So although it appears that the looking glass self, role-taking, and the social mind are universal phenomena. So I'd like to also talk a little bit about emotions as well. So emotions are not simply the result of biology. They're dependent on socialization within a particular society. So this is building upon the several sociological theories that we've been covering. So it's not again, right? The sociologists do not think that, how we react to things are biologically influenced or controlled, but in fact it is dependent on how we're socialized. So most socialization is meant to turn us into conforming members of society. So we do some things and not others as a result of socialization. Again, it's because we all want to be loved and be accepted, so most of us conform. And of course there are a few that rebel or retreat from society completely, or somehow innovate so that way they can still navigate through society as if they were conforming, but they're not, right? So that's being innovative, right? Somehow they're pretending to be conforming, but in fact they're not. So so again, right, most socialization, we're a product of socialization, and how we think of ourselves, how we think of other people is shaped by how we're socialized, and also how we feel as well. And so when we contemplate on an action, it's like whether or not this is a good behavior or bad, we know the emotion, which is good or bad, would result. So again, we usually want to feel good, so we would act accordingly, right? We would act, behave well, so that way we would feel good. Most of us, not all, but most. So again, we're conforming members of society. So in a way, society does set up controls, on our behavior.